that the president speaks of for next week are centered around the fentanyl crisis that they're facing in the United States, but that we are also facing in Canada.
The auto industry is on the verge of a crisis, a full-scale economic battle that could drive up car prices, force factory closures, and put thousands of jobs on the line. And the most shocking part, the threat isn't coming from China or Europe, it's coming from Canada. For decades, North America has operated as a tightly connected automotive powerhouse. But now tariffs, political tensions, and economic shifts are pushing this system to its breaking point. Tesla, Ford, and General Motors are caught in the middle of a crisis that could change the way cars are built and sold forever. In this video, we're breaking down how Canada's latest move is shaking the foundation of the United States auto industry and what it means for your next car purchase. From skyrocketing vehicle costs to disrupted supply chains, the consequences are bigger than most people realize. And here's the kicker: the last move in this trade war could shift global economic power for years to come. Stick with us to the end, because missing this could mean missing one of the biggest economic shifts in modern history. The shocking trade war nobody saw coming. This is not just another trade dispute. It is an economic standoff that could redefine the future of the automotive sector. Automakers depend on trade relationships to keep costs down and production running smoothly. But all of that changed when the United States imposed a high tariff on key Canadian exports, prompting Canada to respond in a way that few saw coming. Instead of imposing broad trade restrictions, Canada took a more calculated and strategic approach, targeting sectors where the United States is most vulnerable. The retaliation was swift. Canada placed heavy tariffs on automotive parts, critical materials for electric vehicle production, and finished vehicles imported from the United States. These tariffs are set to increase the cost of manufacturing in the United States, making cars more expensive and potentially forcing companies to relocate production elsewhere. The auto industry, already struggling with supply chain disruptions and rising costs, now faces an even bigger challenge. At first glance, this may seem like a simple trade disagreement, but it is much more than that. The scale and precision of Canada's response indicate a long-term strategy that could shift the balance of power in the North American auto industry. With billions of dollars in trade at stake, this economic battle is about more than just tariffs. It is about influence, control, and the future of an industry that affects millions of jobs. And while automakers scramble to assess the damage, Canada's strategic retaliation reveals a deeper, more complex game at play. How Canada outsmarted the United States. The automotive sector is not just an economic pillar. It is a political battleground that affects key voter bases and economic stability. By imposing targeted tariffs on crucial auto parts and raw materials, Canada has strategically leveraged its position to create maximum pressure on the United States. One of the most critical aspects of Canada's response is its focus on electric vehicle production. The modern auto industry is undergoing a transformation, with governments worldwide pushing for a shift to electric mobility. The United States has heavily invested in this transition, with automakers betting their future on electric vehicles. But here is the problem. Many of the essential raw materials needed for electric vehicle batteries, such as nickel, lithium, and aluminum, come from Canada. By placing heavy restrictions on these exports, Canada has effectively thrown a wrench into the United States electric vehicle strategy. But Canada's move goes beyond just materials. The tariffs also impact key manufacturing components that automakers rely on for vehicle assembly. Factories across Michigan, Ohio, and other industrial hubs are dependent on Canadian suppliers for everything from steel frames to electrical wiring. With these components now subject to higher tariffs, production costs will skyrocket, and automakers will have to decide whether to absorb the added expense or pass it on to consumers. From a political standpoint, Canada's response is a masterclass in trade warfare. Instead of reacting impulsively, it has chosen to strike in ways that will create pressure not just on corporations, but also on policymakers in Washington. The tariffs hit industries that affect swing states, forcing the United States government to reconsider its position or face economic consequences that could influence upcoming elections. What makes this strategy even more powerful is that it shifts the narrative. Instead of Canada appearing as the victim of United States tariffs, it is positioning itself as a nation that refuses to be bullied economically. This shift in power dynamics is not just about trade. It is about proving that Canada has the ability to push back against economic pressure. The real question now is whether the United States can afford to continue this trade war, or if it will be forced to negotiate a new agreement before the damage becomes irreversible. Tesla's nightmare, the supply chain, just collapsed. No company is feeling the effects of this trade war more than Tesla. As the leading electric vehicle manufacturer in the United States, Tesla relies on a complex network of suppliers to produce its vehicles, and many of those suppliers are based in Canada. With Canada's newly imposed tariffs, Tesla's entire supply chain is in jeopardy. Tesla depends on Canadian nickel, lithium, and aluminum to produce its cutting-edge electric vehicle batteries. These materials are not just important, they are essential. Without them, Tesla's ability to produce its vehicles at scale could be severely compromised. And unlike traditional automakers, which have diversified supply chains, Tesla's production process is more centralized, making it even more vulnerable to trade disruptions. The immediate consequence of these tariffs is a significant increase in the cost of battery production. With supply costs surging, Tesla faces two difficult choices: raise vehicle prices or reduce production. Either option spells trouble. Higher prices could drive potential buyers away, slowing down electric vehicle adoption and pushing more consumers toward gasoline-powered alternatives. Reducing production would mean lower revenue, potential job losses, and a weakened position in the competitive electric vehicle market. The impact extends beyond Tesla. Other automakers, such as General Motors and Ford, also depend on Canadian resources to manufacture electric vehicles. With raw material prices soaring, the entire electric vehicle market is now at risk of falling behind. This comes at a time when global competitors, particularly in China and Europe, are advancing rapidly in battery technology and electric mobility. If the United States struggles to maintain production, it could lose ground in a race that it can no longer afford to fall behind in. Tesla's troubles are a sign of a much bigger problem. This trade war is not just about higher costs, it is about control over the future of the auto industry. If supply chains remain disrupted, companies may be forced to make drastic decisions, such as moving production facilities, changing suppliers, or even lobbying for government intervention. The question is no longer whether this trade war will impact Tesla. It already has. The real concern is whether Tesla can survive it. This trade war isn't what you think. It's a power shift. This is not just a dispute over tariffs and trade policies. It is a power shift that could redefine the entire North American auto industry. The United States has long dominated automotive production, but Canada's move signals that it is no longer willing to play a secondary role in this sector. Canada holds significant economic leverage, not just in automotive components, but in energy resources, natural minerals, and trade routes that are essential to the smooth functioning of the North American market. By wielding these advantages strategically, Canada is demonstrating that it can challenge the economic dominance of the United States in ways that few anticipated. This is not about protecting domestic industries. It is about restructuring the way auto production works in North America. The choices made in the coming months will determine whether the United States continues to lead the industry, or if power will shift toward Canada and other emerging players. What happens next could reshape the entire landscape of manufacturing and trade in North America. But here is where things get even more dangerous. This trade war is not just affecting automakers. It is about to hit consumers directly, leading to price increases, job losses, and economic instability that could change daily life for millions of Americans. The hidden tax on every American driver. Even if you do not care about factory closures, this trade war will make everything you buy more expensive. The impact of auto tariffs is not limited to the cost of vehicles. It is a domino effect that spreads throughout the economy, driving up the prices of everything from groceries to home appliances. The reason? The auto industry is deeply interconnected with numerous other sectors, and when it suffers, so does the entire market. When the cost of manufacturing cars increases due to tariffs on raw materials and components, automakers pass those costs onto consumers. But it does not stop there. The transportation industry, which relies heavily on new and used vehicles, will also see an increase in costs. Higher trucking expenses mean higher costs for businesses moving goods across the country, which in turn leads to price hikes at supermarkets, hardware stores, and online retailers. Inflation, already a pressing concern, will only intensify as a result of this ongoing trade dispute. For the average consumer, this means that even everyday essentials will become more expensive. From groceries that arrive by truck to home appliances that contain aluminum and steel, the rising costs will be felt in ways that most people never expected. The trade war may have started in the auto sector, but its economic impact extends far beyond it. But what happens when the electric vehicle industry, already struggling to remain competitive, faces even greater obstacles? The answer could change the future of transportation. The electric vehicle market was already in trouble. Now it is doomed. The transition to electric vehicles was already facing challenges, but this trade war might stop it in its tracks. Electric vehicles require specific raw materials, such as lithium, nickel, and cobalt, which are crucial for battery production. A significant portion of these materials comes from Canada. With new tariffs disrupting the supply chain, the costs of these essential components are rising rapidly, putting automakers in an impossible position. Tesla, General Motors, and Ford are already grappling with production costs. Tesla, in particular, sources a substantial portion of its raw materials from Canada. If these resources become too expensive or difficult to obtain, Tesla will have no choice but to either raise prices significantly or reduce production capacity. Either option spells disaster for the widespread adoption of electric vehicles. At the same time, China, the global leader in battery production, stands to gain the most. While North America fights over tariffs, China is securing its grip on the electric vehicle market. Automakers in the United States, already struggling to compete, will find themselves at an even greater disadvantage. The irony is inescapable. The very policies meant to boost American manufacturing may end up driving the industry into the hands of foreign competitors. And while electric vehicles become increasingly out of reach for consumers, the ripple effect is pushing more buyers into an already fragile market, the used car industry. The used car market is about to explode. The surge in new car prices is forcing many consumers to turn to the used car market, creating an overwhelming demand that the industry cannot sustain. When the supply of new cars shrinks due to higher manufacturing costs and reduced production, used cars become the next best option. But with demand skyrocketing, prices for used vehicles are climbing at an alarming rate. For middle-class buyers, this is a financial trap. The affordability of reliable transportation is slipping away as both new and used vehicles become too expensive for the average consumer. Families that would typically trade in their older cars for newer models will now hold on to their vehicles longer, further reducing the available supply of used cars. This cycle continues until the market becomes unsustainable. This scenario does not just affect individuals looking for personal transportation. Rideshare companies, delivery services, and small businesses that rely on fleet vehicles will struggle to keep their costs under control. When companies spend more on transportation, they pass those costs on to customers, creating yet another layer of economic strain. But while American consumers struggle with the rising cost of transportation, there are two countries that are emerging as the real winners in this trade dispute: China and Mexico. China and Mexico are the biggest winners, not the United States. If you think this trade war is hurting Canada more than the United States, think again. China and Mexico are getting exactly what they wanted. As the United States and Canada remain locked in economic conflict, China is making strategic moves to strengthen its trade relationships. The longer this dispute continues, the more China solidifies its dominance in the global auto supply chain. China has been aggressively securing access to key raw materials needed for battery production. With Canada's resources becoming more expensive for American automakers, China is stepping in as a more reliable and cost-effective supplier. As a result, electric vehicle manufacturers in China are gaining a competitive edge over their North American counterparts. Mexico, on the other hand, is benefiting from automakers looking for an alternative manufacturing hub. With labor costs lower than in both the United States and Canada, Mexico is becoming an increasingly attractive option for automakers seeking to avoid the fallout from tariffs. Factories that once relied on cross-border trade between the United States and Canada may soon shift their operations south, further reducing the influence of American manufacturers in the global market. The unintended consequence of this trade war is clear. The United States is not strengthening its position, but rather weakening its own industries while allowing foreign competitors to take advantage of the turmoil. And with each passing day, the balance of power in the auto industry continues to shift. But what happens next is even more concerning. This crisis is not just about economics. It is about raw political power. Trump's next move, a trade war on two fronts. Donald Trump just said he wants to impose a 50% or even 100% tariff on Canadian cars. But will it backfire? That is the question shaking the foundations of the North American auto industry. The president has long been a vocal advocate for protectionist trade policies. But this latest move could trigger consequences far beyond what the public realizes. By threatening these extreme tariffs, Trump is attempting to force automakers to relocate their manufacturing back to the United States. However, Canada has already proven it will not be pushed around, retaliating with its own aggressive measures targeting key American industries. The result? A dangerous cycle of economic warfare that could reshape the auto market and severely impact jobs across both nations. In response, U.S. automakers are caught in a bind. If tariffs make Canadian imports prohibitively expensive, production costs for American companies will rise dramatically, forcing them to either hike prices or move operations elsewhere. Even before this latest escalation, manufacturers were already struggling with supply chain disruptions and rising material costs. Now they face an even greater crisis, one that could determine their long-term viability in a rapidly shifting market. The impact of these tariffs extends beyond just economics. This escalating trade conflict is also deeply political, especially in swing states where auto manufacturing remains a key industry. The battle over these tariffs is not just about trade, it is about winning votes, shaping national policy, and determining the future of North American economic relations. Factory shutdowns and job losses. Who's to blame? The irony of these tariffs is unavoidable. They were intended to protect American manufacturing jobs, but they could end up doing the exact opposite. Auto plants in the United States rely heavily on Canadian imports, from raw materials to crucial vehicle components. With tariffs driving up costs, factories may be forced to scale back operations or shut down entirely. For workers in Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky, this trade war could be catastrophic. These states are home to some of the largest automotive manufacturing plants in the country, employing hundreds of thousands of people. If production slows down or factories close, these workers will be left with few alternatives. Entire communities built around the auto industry could face economic ruin. The political blame game has already begun. Trump argues that these tariffs are necessary to restore American manufacturing dominance, while his critics point to the immediate job losses as proof that his policies are short-sighted. Meanwhile, automakers are pleading with Washington to find a resolution before the damage becomes irreversible. At the same time, Canadian leaders are doubling down on their retaliatory tariffs, targeting key American exports like agriculture and whiskey, industries that directly affect states crucial to upcoming elections. The stakes have never been higher, and every political move is being carefully calculated as leaders attempt to balance economic survival with political optics. Washington's dilemma: back down or escalate? With tensions at an all-time high, America finds itself in an impossible position. On one hand, backing down on tariffs could be seen as a sign of weakness, a concession that would allow Canada to maintain leverage. On the other hand, escalating the trade war could plunge the auto industry into deeper crisis, pushing more manufacturers to shift production to Mexico or overseas. This dilemma is further complicated by the fragile state of global supply chains, which have yet to fully recover from pandemic-related disruptions. The cost of electric vehicles is already rising due to supply chain issues, and adding trade restrictions only worsens the situation. American automakers rely on a complex network of suppliers, many of whom source key components from Canada. Increased tariffs could drive up production costs, making electric vehicles less affordable and slowing adoption rates. This puts America in a difficult position, balancing the push for a cleaner future with the economic realities of rising costs and potential job losses in the manufacturing sector. Meanwhile, Trump and his supporters are capitalizing on the chaos. The president has positioned himself as the only leader willing to take bold action to protect American jobs, even as manufacturers and economists warn that his approach could have devastating consequences. His rhetoric frames the crisis as proof of Biden's failure to stand up for American industry, energizing his base while stoking fears about the economy. The contrast between these two leadership styles is shaping public perception and could play a major role in future elections. As both sides dig in, the fate of the auto industry and the broader economic landscape hangs in the balance. Could Canada weaponize energy next? If you think this trade war is bad now, imagine what would happen if Canada decided to use its most powerful bargaining chip, energy. The United States is heavily dependent on Canadian oil, natural gas, and electricity. If Canada were to restrict exports or impose heavy taxes on energy supplies, the economic repercussions would be felt across every sector. Canada is the largest foreign supplier of crude oil to the United States, accounting for nearly half of all oil imports. A sudden disruption to that supply could cause fuel prices to skyrocket overnight, leading to an inflation surge that would impact businesses and consumers alike. Gas prices, already a contentious political issue, could reach unprecedented highs, fueling public outrage and putting even more pressure on Washington to resolve the conflict. Beyond oil, Canada also supplies hydroelectric power to several northern U.S. states. Cities like New York, Chicago, and Detroit rely on Canadian electricity to keep their grids stable. If that supply were disrupted, rolling blackouts and power shortages could become a reality, creating an energy crisis that would overshadow even the current trade dispute. For now, Canadian officials have not taken such drastic steps, but the possibility alone gives them enormous leverage. While the U.S. imposes tariffs on Canadian imports, Canada holds a weapon that could inflict far greater economic damage in retaliation. If trade negotiations do not lead to a resolution, energy restrictions may become Canada's next move, escalating the conflict to an entirely new level. With factories at risk, energy supplies in jeopardy, and the political landscape shifting rapidly, the future of the North American auto industry hangs in the balance. But this crisis is not just about tariffs. It is about the long-term direction of U.S. manufacturing, trade policy, and economic power. The real question now is, can the United States adapt and rebuild, or is this the beginning of a permanent decline? The rise and fall of U.S. manufacturing. Can the United States auto industry survive without Canada? The answer is far more complex than it seems. While a resurgence of American manufacturing may sound promising, the reality is far more challenging. The intricate web of supply chains that has defined the North American auto industry for decades cannot simply be unraveled without severe consequences. The idea of completely reshoring car production sounds appealing, keeping jobs domestic, reducing reliance on foreign trade, and strengthening economic security. However, the scale of investment, time, and resources required makes this nearly impossible. Automakers would need to construct new factories, establish supplier networks, and develop advanced manufacturing infrastructure. Even then, American labor costs remain significantly higher than those in competing markets, making large-scale production much less viable. Moving away from this interconnected system would create logistical nightmares and drive up vehicle prices for consumers. Many critical components, such as aluminum, nickel, and lithium, come from Canada. Replacing these with domestic alternatives would require years of investment and infrastructure development. While government incentives may encourage localized production, the transition would not happen overnight. At the same time, the global auto industry is evolving in ways that could permanently reshape its power dynamics. As supply chains become more fractured, major automakers are reconsidering their long-term strategies, with some looking to Asia and South America for new production sites. If trade tensions persist, the United States risks losing its influence over the industry, while competitors such as China and Mexico solidify their positions as global leaders. The road ahead is uncertain. The United States stands at a crossroads, with two distinct paths that will determine the fate of its auto industry. One option involves stabilizing trade relations, investing in manufacturing innovation, and fostering stronger partnerships to maintain economic strength. The other path leans toward isolationism, which could lead to higher costs, reduced investment, and long-term decline. Beyond economic concerns, there is also the question of consumer impact. If tariffs and trade restrictions continue, American car buyers will feel the effects through rising vehicle prices, longer wait times, and fewer affordable options. Automakers must find a balance between maintaining profitability and keeping cars accessible to the average buyer. This moment in history could define the trajectory of American manufacturing for decades. Will the United States reclaim its dominance through strategic decisions, or will it continue down a path of economic isolation? The answer will shape the future of the industry and the nation's role in the global economy. But what do you think? Let's talk.